that year.
Okay, so let me look at what we have on the.
When that year received the 100 packet. Where was it at? And you need to do stuff, for example, common practice for Wi-Fi and trains. Wi-Fi is cellular too. And what that means is that the Wi-Fi is the Wi-Fi could be implemented with really bad buffering strategies with respect to what it can get to the cellular network, and you probably could not. You could probably clear up this like one step upstream.
Okay. Present the PDF again. For some reason.
Or highs, widgets in the tunnel. And no, the carrier did not get around to wiring the source.
Okay, welcome to Tropical Room Potsdam 2. We have requested that the Secretariat see if they can lower the temperature to tropical, subtropical maybe. Please remember, those of you who are dressed in appropriate fashion for humid subtropical temperatures, not to laugh too much at those of us who are in jeans and heavy shirts. As is typical for us, one of the first notes we need to do is to find somebody to act as Jabber relay. Okay, we have a Jabber relay ready and willing to go. Thank you, Olga. And somebody to take notes. These are action item things were decided, foo, bar, and baz. This does not have to be he said, she said, or he said, or they said, or anything like that. Just like the working group polled for reviewers for IceBiz, and X stepped up. So who is willing to take notes? I will pick people by random lot if no one puts up their hand. Oh, Harold, thank you. You put up your hand. You're hiding your hand. Oh, that's very sad. So who can I talk into this? Who I'm not going to have to embarrass by causing them to lift their hand manually. We cannot begin until this happens. Thank you. The usual suspects at it again. Those polite Scandinavians. Okay, so we did receive an agenda bash. We have to have the chair slides before the agenda bash goes. So the last time we were here, Rye, an area now deceased, was our area. Gonzalo was our AD. He's currently translated into being the chair of the Internet Society now. Magnus has had children, still one of our chairs. Support for Estes was the big controversy at the last Berlin meeting. I hope you all remember that fun. The data channel drafts had not been in the RFC editor's queue for 560 days. I realize that you're very happy here in Rtcweb, but really we should not be passing this working group on to our children. We also know that the last addition to the EU, Croatia, had just occurred and nobody had left yet. So we really would like to finish this working group before Brexit completes. Indeed, we would like to be getting to working group last call, let's say soon. Just skip this. We're not going to sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat. It's too hot. Okay, note well, for those of you who haven't been in an IETF meeting before this week, or indeed ever, the IETF has a couple of BCPs, which govern the IPR rules for contributions to the IETF. Please familiarize yourself with them or remain silent and make no contributions. Our agenda. This is the administrivia bit, and we are going to immediately bash this to take a question on the transports draft, which has come up, to then allow the people with a question to move on with their day, probably going to SAG, I'm guessing. And then we'll talk about JSEP. Do we have anybody remote who might want to talk about JSEP? Yeah, sure, Sean. Sean always likes talking about JSEP. And maybe Randall. And then we'll talk about draft IETF Rtcweb SDP, which, as you remember, are the complex examples draft that Paul Kizabet has started a review for us. So with that, David, you want to come up and go through the issue?
Actually, we just do one thing first, which is some other working groups have some documents we depend upon, and we need some. They're about to go to working group last call, and we would like to get some volunteers to agree to review them. So the three documents is the IceBiz, the Trickle IceBiz, and StunBiz. So can anyone volunteer to review IceBiz? Everything we're doing depends on this. No one can read it.
All right.
Probably be sometime in August or some early September, that sort of.
Eric Rescorla has raised his hand
Yep.
to review it. Thank you. And Magnus Westerlund.
And what about all the others too? Trickle Ice and StunBiz? Okay. Magnus, you're in too? Double fun?
I can do them, but I'm on vacation today. I'm not working, so.
Okay. Okay, we'll note that. Magnus, yeah.
Please leave your address so we can stop by and visit you on vacation, because that would be nice. But in the meantime, off to David.
Okay. Can somebody go kill them? Whoever's making the noise in the hallway, can you tell?
It's coming through a speaker. If it's coming through a speaker, unplug it.
I see. Okay.
Okay, so I'm your agenda bash, David Black, Chair TCBWG, one of the working groups that has drafts on which Rtcweb depends. The good news is this draft is IESG approved, and we've got one last little issue that we need to close here before we can actually complete the draft and have our ask the AD to go send it on to the RFC editor. This is the DSCP black hole issue, which is what if you use a non-zero DSCP and the result is that the network black holes the traffic. Doesn't happen very often, but there's some initial study done and there's some evidence happens often enough we ought to worry about it. Now, Magnus, I'm going to want to get you up to the mic in a moment here because I think you outlined the solution here, which is that the TSVWG draft on DSCP says as little as possible about the issue. The Rtcweb transports draft explains how to address it, and I just need to come up with a little bit of text to point over to Rtcweb transports draft. And so I think the question for this meeting is, what should the Rtcweb transports draft say about the possibility of a non-zero DSCP black holing traffic and the possibility of using ICE to avoid loss of connectivity for that reason? Magnus?
Let's see. Magnus Westland. Yeah, I think the realistic thing is actually not demand a solution. Just say that this is an issue. You probably should have something, and I think one of the problems here to find the stuck key to writing the solution draft. So.
Okay, so assuming we don't have a solution draft, who's the stuck key for writing the text in the transports draft that explains what's going on?
Colin Perkins, who was pointing at Magnus for a minute. I think that the solution probably looks a lot like the fallback solution we have for using ECN when ECN fails. And there is probably text in RFC 6679 which describes ECN, which you can just steal, that describes what to do here. I mean, it basically says try using ECN, and if it doesn't work and you get feedback that it's not working, just switch back to the original approach.
And ICE can the ICE framework detect the bad firewalls that black hole traffic tries to use ECN? Respond to lack of response.
So I think there are two ways of doing this. You can either send out an ICE a stun message as one of your ICE candidates, which is marked with the appropriate diffserv code point, and see if it works.
Yes.
And someone who understands ICE then needs to write down where that goes in the prioritization and so on. And that's not me because I don't understand ICE. Oh, the alternative is just if you plan on using this, start sending it. If the RTCP comes back saying it wasn't being received, then switch to not marking. And that, yeah, you clip the first few seconds, but then it starts working. And that's a much easier text to write because it's just one paragraph that says do that.
Will you write that one paragraph?
Oh, I mean, yeah. So if you plan to use diff serve code points other than whatever the default is, then if your RTCP feedback says it's not being received, you probably want to switch back to not sending it with that marking.
Okay, that would be a fine paragraph. It has to live in the Rtcweb transport strap. It should not live in the, probably should not live in the TCWG QS strap and the code points.
Yeah,
Let's-
yeah, it should be in the transport strap.
Let's hear from the rest of the line here. I don't think that's going to quite work. I don't think we're going to get to the point where we have RTP to get the RTCP. Because we will.
My assumption is you're not marking RTCP. So if you start sending RTP that's marked and it doesn't get through, then your RTCP feedback will come back saying there's no packets being received, in which case you say, okay, it's not working, I'll switch to not marking my RTP packets. And yeah, it clips the first few seconds, but at that point it falls back.
So Harald Overstrand, document editor and considerably lazy. I tried to find the text that I sent to the list last week about this issue. It basically says that warning, warning, warning. If you use DSCP markings, you might regret it. If you regret it, you should do something about it, like not using them. And how to detect that is an implementation matter. Being lazy, I thought, isn't that roughly what the text should say? And if so, can we just leave it alone?
Yeah, I think including the text on how to detect it using the RTCP would be a valuable addition to the warning, warning, warning. But it looks like Jonathan Lennox disagrees and is giving the.
Yeah, so Magnus Westland. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two aspects of this, which is actually, so during the initial handshakes, etc., and the TLS established that you clearly should not mark the SSP, but if anyway you haven't decided on traffic or which priority you have, so you're not going to mark most likely anyway. So that's one aspect. And then you also have the data channel, and that also can be setting code points, and that possibly needs paragraph itself saying something about, and that hook might actually be harder to implement than the one for RTCP. So.
Jonathan Lennox. So, I mean, I believe what the ISPEC says, and I haven't read this section of ISPIS in a while, is that if you're only going to use a single DSCP for every packet sent on this 5-tuple, then you should use that same DSCP for the ICE, and thus presumably the DSCP. So if it fails, you'll know because the ICE won't come back. If you're doing multiple DSCPs, that's maybe a little harder, because presumably that would mean you do the ICE and the DTLS as 0. In which case, I mean, one thing you obviously could do, you can always send, additional stun. You can send additional stun checks on that 5-tuple with, the DSCPs you're curious about, if you think you need to be curious about it, and check them and see if those come back. That's certainly a relatively easy thing to do once you've converged on a candidate or whatever. I think that's better than trying to do it based on RTCP, which will be a much slower process to converge on.
So you'd recommend two rounds. Go settle on the candidate you want with a first round of stun, and then a second round of stun to probe the set DSCPs that
yeah, that's what I'd say. Or for whatever reason you want to say, I only want to use a candidate where my DSCPs work, you could even do the probes before you settle on a candidate if that's what you feel like doing. That's an implementation choice.
Okay, where does that get written up?
Well, I don't see us doing multiple rounds of checks. That's just, I don't think there's multiple rounds of checks. It's like a huge implementation hassle. Frankly, around it, you just use the DSCP and then do that. If there's you're right, Jonathan, exactly what 5245 says. So it seems like there are effectively two alternatives here, right? One is assume that at least one of your paths will pass the DSCP markings, and given that you are presumably doing turn
somewhere, you're both doing terminals. That seems like a reasonably plausible story. And so simply set with DSCP. And the other is to do kind of like DTLS does, which is to say, or you use for PathMTU, namely send the first 2 of the 7 with the DSCP markings, and if those fail, then assume the path is either dead or there's DSCP problems, and have the 3rd and 4th retransmission or something. Take the code points off. As far as mixing the DSCP code points, that sounds disastrous in any case. So.
Okay, so we're going to take Randall Jessup from that side.
I think it's actually even worse than that, as Randall Jessup Mozilla, because not only do you have the problem of the data channel where you don't have the RTCP, etc. thing, and you may be running a different code point than the RTP, so that whole part comes in. But on top of that, as I mentioned on the list, you could have a route change, and you could be suddenly going through a router that black holes you where you weren't before. So doing it, so you have to have some way to detect failure, and then at least do a re-ice, assuming ice will pick up on the code point failure and work around it, and that which is still an issue that is unresolved from the comments about multiple code points.
Harald Ahlström. I will note that all the issues with path failure are exactly identical to all the other reasons for path failure, and are worked around the same way with a nice restart. So I suspect that we won't converge on a single mechanism within the reasonable time frame for shoveling the transport draft up the chain. So I'd like to leave it as is, perhaps with a paragraph saying more implementation guidance is being worked on.
So in essence, add a paragraph that points out that there are potential problems with DSCP, which could include partial loss of connectivity, namely your audio and video channels might get black hole, but your data channel might get through, and flag it as in effect watch this space.
Do we have that text?
So I don't believe this is different from any other reason for failures. We have gateways that drop large packets. We have gateways that drop encrypted packets. We have gateways that drop things just because they like to drop things, and we have routes that change.
Okay, so you already have failure cases in which you can lose some of the media flows in a WebRTC session, but not all of them. Okay, those are covered, and we can add DSCP to that and declare victory. That'd be great. I'd like to see the text that'll land the transports draft, and then it becomes easy to figure out what goes in the TSVWG QoS draft.
Did you have something to add?
Tim Panton, I'm confused. If we say it's solved in DTLS or described in DTLS already, we can't do anything until DTLS has worked. So I don't see why there's still a problem. Maybe I've misunderstood something. Can we not just say, like, we use the DTLS solution and carry that on to the other packets after that?
You mean for the data channel?
No, in general. Like, you can't exchange keys until the DTLS has come up. So, like, there is no RTP until DTLS has come up. So whatever DTLS specifies to solve this problem, we've already done it by the time you have either RTP or SCTP, or have I missed something?
If I understood Jonathan correctly, what I think happens in the case of interest, which is where we want to use a variety of DSCPs in order to keep audio, video, and data somewhat prioritized. DTLS will come up with DSCP 0, tell you all is swell and fine. You'll open up the session, your audio gets through, your data gets through, and your video is getting black holed.
So you're changing the, I'll talk about this somewhere else.
Well, it's an N tuple where one item of the tuple is the DSCP marking, and where the rules determining what happens apply differently because of the marking, right?
Yeah, Martin Thompson, DTLS doesn't include a solution for this. What Eka was talking about is that DTLS, the solution that DTLS has for path MTU detection could be sort of tweaked to sort of accommodate some of this, but I think we've kind of settled on the fact that it's probably not the right thing to do. By the way, I think I agree with Harold to some extent here.
So
Okay, so-
Harold, did we sign you up to write the text?
So let me make sure I get the sense of the room that we all agree on what's going to be said in this text. So what I heard him say was we will treat this case as completely parallel to any other path failure case, and we'll use the same method to recover, which is ICE restart. Is that a fair summary, Harold? Okay. Is there anybody who disagrees with this way forward in the room? Magnus is coming to the mic. Woohoo!
So, I mean, the problem is still the fact that you have multiple different 6 tuples and the ones on the 5 tuple. And I mean, ICE restart is probably going to end up restarting saying, oh, this path works fine for DCP 0, but not for 4, for example. And then you're still,
Yeah, Martin Thompson. I needed some time to do my research here. IceBiz still says that you should mark the ICE packets with the same markings as the media that you intend to send on that path. If you do otherwise, you end up with potentially different treatment in the network. It's a different 7 tuple or 8 tuple or whatever the hell it is now.
Yeah, but does ICE is ICE going to do a path check per DSCP if we want to use 4 of them?
No.
Didn't think so.
no, and that's, I mean, so, yeah, I mean, Magnus Westling, yeah, that was actually could be one potential mechanism of checking it, but I think the 2-round approach, which Echo would have been somewhat, but it's still, the issue remains is that ICE restart will not solve these cases when you're using multiple different DSCPs. So.
Can we tell implementers that if they have an outage on some classes of the traffic, not others, to try an ICE restart?
Yeah. Turn off
Sorry.
DSCP is more important. Yeah, I mean, so ICE allows you to send an extra check with whatever extra parameters you want at any time. It doesn't affect the machinery of ICE, but that's just sort of like a thing. So you could use this for additional probes of other things about your path, you know, whether it's ECN or DSCP or path MTU or whatever. That's perfectly valid and doesn't affect the ICE machinery. It's just, you know, the other side basically whenever it gets a check, you respond saying, yeah, I got this check. That's just how, you know, ICE works. That, you know, you always respond to checks. So this is kind of an implementation decision that if he wants to probe additional things, he can. So like, not sure if we need to, how much we need to standardize at all, though maybe implementation guidance would be helpful.
Magnus Westland, I guess the conclusion here is really that you cannot only say do ICE restart, you also have to have saying, okay, the kind of orders don't use DCPs going forward, because then you might end up in the same situation you were before if you have this that you get some flows through and not others.
So to paraphrase that, you're saying that if it fails, you need to turn the priorities off back to normal and then do a nice restart.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
No, well, okay, you could just turn it off if you detect it.
Since all of the other path failures cause us to do an ICE restart, I agree with Harold that having a single thing to do here is probably a little bit cleaner. Is there anybody who has terrible agita with that? Oh, Peter has terrible agita with that. Express your pain to us, Peter.
So Martin Thompson, I was going to say that the most important thing here is that you need to be able to detect the failure, and that's the first thing you need to get right, which is if you are using multiple DSCP markings for the same whatever number tuple, then you are obligated to have independent monitoring of each one of those so that you can detect a failure, in which case that very firmly points as DSCP as a potential culprit in that situation, and then all the remedies that we just identified.
Peter Thatcher. That's basically what I was going to say is if we say the ice restart is the remedy, what triggers the ice restart? Because right now an ice restart is triggered when the ice checks fail. But if the ice checks over one DSCP marking and the video is over a different DSCP marking, then ice would think everything's hunky-dory and then the video would stop working. So like Martin was mentioning, how do you know that you need to trigger an ice restart?
Oh, yeah. This gets back to Colin's RTCP comment.
So for the ones which are RTP, yes, the RTCP method will work. For the data channel, since it has a handshake and isn't likely to change DSCP markings after the handshake, you would detect it by the handshake failure of the DTLS session.
Or you'll detect it on connection connection drop. SCTP data channel, you can change the DSCP marking after the handshake, but it's always one mark, and SCTP will help you by telling you when to drop the connection.
Okay,
So
I was not aware of that.
Oh, we have Randall again.
The ghost in the machine.
The one possible thing would be when you do an ice restart, because you've seen a single channel fail, or potentially all of them, because they could all fail on if suddenly you switched a route to something that dropped anything with DSCP markings. You could do your new ice using DSCP 0 and then start sending on DSCP 0 for a short time, then switch. If the traffic goes away when you switch, you know you've got DSCP blocking your stuff, and you're going to have to go back to 0. So I mean, the application can. It's one of the many ways in which you can try to adapt to this and figure it out. The other option of all restarts, just go back to 0 and stay there. Okay, but I think that we can provide guidance for this. I don't think there's a single solution, because it's a complex space and there's many ways things can fail here. But I guess Randall just Mozilla.
Peter?
So the idea that you would say the SCTP handshake failed, so now I'm going to say that the ICE connectivity has failed, so I'll tell the JavaScript application the ICE connectivity has failed, so the JavaScript application will trigger an ICE restart seems bonkers. Like, that sounds painful and weird. So
When you say it that way, yeah.
it's kind of the same with the RTCP. Like, if the RTCP stops, then you say the ICE connection state has failed and the JavaScript issues an ICE restart. That sounds bonkers too. But then the idea that you would be probing with one marking and then, oh, that one's not working, let's try another marking and let's wait a little while to see if that one's working, that sounds bonkers too. All of them sound bonkers.
So I don't think we'd probe with multiple. I mean, if any of them fail other than 0, you're probably just going to go back to 0, because like I think the testing we've seen has been like everything fails, right? So it may not be. I mean, I get your point, but
Ben Schwartz, Google. So it sounds to me like we're brainstorming in a working group meeting, which is not a good sign, and maybe we should do that elsewhere. But I'll keep making the problem worse and say, if it were up to me, I would follow Ecker's idea of advising that if DSCP markings, if you lose your first 2 stun checks, then you drop DSCP markings, and you require that everything on a candidate pair have, including stun and everything else, have the same DSCP markings. And if you want DSCP diversity, then you can't combine all this stuff.
So Harold, it looks to me from a quick email that you have already entered something into the DSCP bleaching issue. Do you wish to amend it based on the conversation, or do you want me to read it aloud?
I will add to it that 3 minutes.
Okay, so he's nah, it's short. Resolution and working group in Berlin, we will treat DSCP-induced path failure parallel with other types of path failure and resolve it by using an ICE restart. Note, there is a problem with multiple DSCP code points on a single transport, where one might be blocked and another might get through. In this case, the ICE probes using one DSCP code point may succeed while others fail. This is complex and should be warned about. Likely mode of solution is ICE restart with DSCP markings turned off, but detection requires watching the multiple DSCP code point using channels for differential failures. That actually seems like a reasonable summary to me of where we are. and to avoid a whole lot of additional brainstorming was Ben's word, brainstorming in the working group at the moment. If anybody has a different resolution in mind for that, can I ask you to contact Harold or update the GitHub issue appropriately? Is that okay?
David, does that give you what you need to?
I think we're on the right path. I think I want to see the actual text that is going to land in the transports draft that can be sent to the list, or it can be a new version of the transports draft. Once I have that, it's fairly easy to write the one sentence I need to point to, but I need to know what I'm pointing to before I set up a pointer.
So I believe that it would have to be in an update to the draft.
That would work.
Justin Roberti in the chat room says that he will be in touch with Harold. Let's take that as a promise for the notes.
All right. We'll write that
And
down.
I will take on, Harold, I will take on the action item to write the candidate paragraph and send it to the list by,
Yeah, and please send it to the
End
HVWG
of the
list
day.
also, Harold.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're back on the agenda.
Okay, we're back to our agenda. So the next bit here then is JSEP. I believe Reverend Rescorla will be leading us through this element of our.
Yeah, I'm glad to have a mic that's cordless this time. Wow, that's like really awkward to see it from there.
Yes, we didn't lose the pink box.
Yeah, all the pink box can like lose because I can't deal with that. Okay, so we made a bunch of changes. As usual, the list of changes is here. Things with asterisks are things which we at least make some people attempt to explain on subsequent slides. Things with asterisks are things which we hope are self-explanatory enough or boring enough or whatever that we don't need slides. I guess I'll just go through the things that we that were non-controversial and then or non-substantive, and then I'll get to the substantive ones in a minute. The ad track algorithm. I think there's a PR about that. Okay, well, so we actually described how ad track works, which we never really had before. We had some mutterings about it, and we had this TIS formula, which we incorrectly failed to notice that that one of TIS, which one I cannot remember, was in kilobits and one was in bits. So trying to convert between them had produced some issues. So you had to like, multiply by some stuff, but that was easy to fix when we finally fixed it. Though apparently it took 2 PRs to do so. Next slide. Right. So there is this text about what you're supposed to do in terms of the codecs you sent in when you reoffered. And it had been sort of inartfully written that you were supposed to require that you only sent the codecs that were in the remote description, which was fine as long as the person doing the reoffer was the person who did the initial offer. But if you're the answerer, then technically what this suggested was that that you can see where this is going. If the offer sent foo and bar, and you only accepted bar, technically speaking, you're allowed to reoffer with both foo and bar, which is clearly insane. So, but it's some confusion about remote description versus current one. So the new text basically says sensibly that you can only reoffer the things you actually negotiated as opposed to the things that the other guy sent you, which seems much more sensible. So next slide. Oh yeah. Yes, we must have this wrong.
So Jonathan Lennox, what I wanted to ask is this that you must send exactly what was negotiated, or you must send
a subset? A
subset. So you're allowed to say, okay, now that we've converted to BP8, I'm turning off my H.264 hardware and things.
Yes, yes, of course. Yes, you can't expand the set. I believe it says that correctly. Next slide. Right. So this was discussed last time, and despite you would think this would be incredibly clear, there was this question about what to do if you had no codecs to come in the M line, which, as I say, you would think was clear because from 3064, but apparently somehow either it's not clear in 3064, it wasn't clear in a document. But the bottom line is now we say the sensible thing, which is that you should set the port equals 0 and read that M line, but otherwise continue to attempt to negotiate the connection. There may somewhere be some text that says if none of the M lines work, maybe you should abandon the connection entirely. But I think it actually probably is possible to to like send back an SDP answer where you reject every M line, but nevertheless appear to accept the call. So anyway, that's what we said. Next slide. This has a little bit of this next point. I think there may actually be some controversy about. So what happens if you are the answerer and you have your policy set to max bundle, and somebody sends you an offer which is unbundled? Now, it's obvious if you're the other direction. If you, namely, if you set max bundle and the other side doesn't know how to bundle, they're going to have kind of a bad day. However, this direction, you could in principle accept like all of the M lines anyway, because the reason for having the max bundle setting is not necessarily to enforce policy, is to avoid the requirement to like do a bunch of extra gathering if you're not interested in it, right? So the difference between max bundle and the other settings is how much gathering you have to do. So when you get an unbundled request and people don't offer you bundle, like in principle you could say, well, actually I'd rather train up doing the gathering now because I'd like to have all the M lines, please, because you have more information than you otherwise have. In terms of symmetry and predictability, it was better to end up with the same situation, which is you only had one M line. So the rules now say you should reverse that. If you're max bundle and someone offers you your max bundle and someone offers you like a bunch of M lines and they can't bundle them, you just take the first one anyway.
Krista Holmberg, so what if you receive an offer with some M lines that are bundled and some that aren't bundled?
Then you take all the. I'm not sure what the text says, but the answer should be you can take all the ones that are bundled.
I think the text right now says you take all the ones that are in the first M line. So if that was what was bundled, we may have to check this.
Yeah.
I think we.
So let us distinguish the question. I believe the correct answer, whatever the text may actually say, is you take all the ones that are able to bundle on the first M line. And if the text actually, if people don't know that's what the text should say, let's negotiate that. If people just or the text doesn't say that, we'll make sure it says that. The point is to get the symmetrical behavior you would get, is to give you the symmetrical behavior you would get if you had been the offerer.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, I think this is setting us up for max bundle being a bustage switch that you can just turn on. Would you like bustage, yes or no? Particularly for an answer, you're essentially saying that you're going to create a session and you're going to get. I mean, sure, this is a sort of perverse case, but if you receive an completely unbundled offer, you're going to reject everything but one.
Yes.
Yeah.
But no, but precisely, I argue that not doing that is what creates the bustage, because then you get intermittence. And
intermittence in what way?
Intermittence in that if you have a system which is agnostic between who's offer and who's answer, assigns someone's offer, assigns someone's answer, right? That if you don't do it this way, then like half the time it works and half the time it doesn't work. And if you do it this way, it always doesn't work. If what you wanted was
that's exactly what I'm suggesting, is that you're getting in. If the max bundler is the one that generates the offer,
yes,
then assuming the other side actually can do that, then you get all of the media sections together. And if the other side decides to generate with what's the opposite of max bundle, bundle nothing, option, then you're gonna have the other option. You're gonna have all of the M lines work, unless you, yeah.
I'm very confused about what are you arguing? What behavior are you arguing?
I don't want to have situations where we're basically setting it up for just things failing because there's no other reason than someone told them to fail. Someone asked for a session. They provided some media streams, and you're telling them that you're going to turn half of those media streams off. Yeah.
I mean, from here or whatever. Yeah.
So Justin Ecker and I spent a ton of time going about this. Just let me hit the symmetry thing. That there's two cases here. There's two paths we can go. The case that Ecker's trying to get to is that what happens is exactly the same regardless of which side makes the offer. So if it's A to B, you get the same results if it was B to A. The other design path that we could take, in one direction, you would get a bunch of things, and the other direction, you'd get only one thing.
So I think the problem is that you're looking for exactly the same thing at the wrong layer. So you're looking for exactly the same thing in terms of what happens to the number of transports that are set up. What I'm looking for is exactly the same thing to happen for the number of streams that pop out of either end. And I think that's more important than the thing that...
No, it produces the same number of streams that pop out of either end.
No?
So this is not, John Lennox, this is not if you get a max compat. This is if you get something from somebody who doesn't understand bundle at all. If you get a max compat and you have max bundle policy, you'll just respond to yes, it's bundled.
Yeah, right.
And you'll be happy. So, I mean, I think what you could, I mean, as an application, you could say, okay, well, if I'm injecting a remote offer, before I do that, I'm going to set my max bundle policy to whichever the thing is that makes everything work, which I guess is max compat.
Yeah.
But when I'm generating an offer, I'm going to set my max bundle policy to max bundle. You know, and as an application, I can get everything to work, you know, the way, you know, as I want it to, if that's what I want. So, but, you know, I think this is probably better as a default, because if the other thing were the default, you couldn't get this behavior with an application.
Yes, that's what Peter Thatcher. That's what I was going to say, is that as an application developer, I want max bundle to mean I'm getting bundle or I'm only getting one inline. I don't want more than one inline. So if we didn't make that the meaning, that I would argue that we would need another policy option so that I can get that. But as Lennox points out, the application, if it really wants, it can implement this using the max bundle side. I mean, using the really max bundle.
Tim Terry from Mozilla. If I can rephrase what I think Martin Thompson was trying to say, it was you're considering two different cases of getting the same thing. In your case, you're saying someone offering who understands max bundle versus someone receiving who understands max bundle, and what Martin was saying is that you know, someone offering who doesn't understand max bundle is going to give you a bunch of unbundled streams and everything's going to work, right? As opposed to
you mean everything would work if it were not written up this way.
right.
Yes, I mean, I think, I hope we all agree that this is creating a less rich behavior than I'm capable of providing. As the answerer, in principle, I could say, well, now I know this other guy is not going to bundle. I'd rather accept all the M lines. Yes, you could do that. I mean, this is a choice, is a design choice, not a requirement, not a design invariant. Happy you're wrong about this, really. I don't care very much.
Christopher, so when you're max bundle and you send an offer,
Yes.
so if I understand, you're gonna have you're only gonna offer bundle, and all M lines but one are gonna be bundle only, right?
Correct.
So what's the media type of that one M line which is not bundle only going to be? Is that always going to be audio, for example, or is that something the user can select?
It would be the first one, the first M line, which is determined by the order of ad track, as I remember correctly. Whatever it happens to be.
The reason I'm asking is because now you say reject all but the first M line without really considering. I mean, say that you get data channel, audio, and video. I know you say you're going to accept the data channel because that's the first one, and you're going to discard audio and video. Wouldn't it be more useful, for example, to maybe accept the audio and
well, the one thing almost certainly will not be is data channel, because anybody just the situation we find ourselves in, almost certainly anybody who has data channel will also be able to bundle, but.
Well, let's take it more simple then. It's audio. The first one is video, and the second is audio. Do you want to accept the video and reject the audio?
I don't have a problem with that. That's exactly the behavior you get if you were the offerer.
Peter Thatcher. I think we really shouldn't get so worked up about all this, because if the JavaScript wants everything to work, it won't set max bundle, right? Like if you set max bundle, you're opting into like, I'm okay with things not working if the other side doesn't do bundle. So if they're worried about the other side not doing bundle, don't set max.
I mean, the purpose of this particular design choice is supposed to be you catch this in your testing, as opposed to the field.
If we're worried about all these cases where the other side might not do bundle, but you're not supposed to use max bundle as an application developer unless you know the other side does bundle.
Anyway, if anybody strongly objects, I'm happy to have the chair take a hum or whatever. Like, I really don't care about this very much. Okay, next slide. We just spent about 2 days on this. Okay, Cullen may have to take this, but right. So we're going to reconstruct this. I'm not going to try to read this slide since it was written in a way I don't typically do my slides, but the bottom line here is that the answerer is reduced to accepting the LS groups which are offered to him, or discarding the LS groups which are offered to him by the offerer. And if you wish to have some different LS arrangement, that is not an option in there's not an option according to specification. So we went back and forth, and if there was some way to, if there was some way like salvage situation, and we finally concluded was that if the way that the transceivers have been set up by the answerer was like incompatible with lip sync status requested by the offerer, then basically you should give up and not do any lip sync at all. And that if the application wishes to fix this, is like the application is really welcome to do as many re-offers and re-adds and removes as it pleases, but we're not going to tell the browser to try to fix it for you. We finally where we came down on this. And I think that this roughly reflects the consensus of everybody who finally talked about this with, because all the attempts to fix it were just too gross. So all the draft really does is acknowledge those facts. Is lay out the situation, the draft then does is lay out the situations in which it can't work and then acknowledge that it can't work and then say we're not going to fix them.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, just to clarify, when you're given a set of streams to try to match to an offer, you will, if those set of streams match neatly with the LS groups that appear in that offer, you will generate LS groups that correspond to that offer.
Match or subset.
Right, match or subset. But if there's anything that sort of crosses over two LS groups, you're just going to abandon those two LS groups.
Correct.
Works for me. I mean, the most common case here is that you have an LS group that covers audio and video, and it's going to work.
Yeah. It's like if you have, it's like this screw case where you. I think the one thing is I think we, so I recall correctly, we didn't tell you had to try very hard to make it match up.
Right. I imagine that what's going to happen here is we're going to take a really naive attempt at it, and if it fails, we'll just throw away that LS group.
Yeah. Colin, any more of this?
No, I mean, I think that nails that. And look, I think we agreed to this solution at the previous meeting.
I think so too, yeah.
We're now bringing forward the text that we think implements this. And this is about a weird corner case, which if you care about, you can do a reoffer to solve. I mean, that's,
Okay, Justin Roberti, the app can still create new M lines that have a new LS group for sync if it wants to. It's just not automatic.
Correct, sir. Thank you for helping with that. Next slide. Okay, so now that gets us through the stuff we did that we hope you pre-approved and now post-approved. Now let's talk about the things nobody's agreed on. So in an affiliated working group, which I believe has been canceled for this meeting. Oh no, that was ICE, not M-Music. Sorry, that was just a few minutes ago, which I wasn't there. We agreed that the ICE candidates would somehow, in principle, indicate which phase of ICE gathering they came to, so there wasn't confusion about that, about like if you're doing ICE restart, which half it came from in trickle. So I have to admit, I wasn't at ICE today, so did something happen along these lines?
No, this was not discussed.
Okay, so we agreed on. We agreed on it last time.
Okay, I correct.
Okay, so hopefully the agreement still continues to obtain. So that removes the ambiguity about which candidates came from. Unfortunately, there's still ambiguity at end of candidates. And so you can see how this can create problems if you get end of candidates. In the middle of negotiation, in the last restart, which one it came from. So we propose, and we would like to propose to the ICE working group that they change end of candidates marker to also contain, a UFrag so you can tell what text going on.
Our participant left.
Jonathan Lennox. So, I mean, I think that I believe what the ICE working group decided is that the encoding of this is entirely up to the people using it, and so, there's, you don't need to propose it to the ICE working group, you just need to do it.
Oh, well, that'd be certainly straightforward for me.
The other thing we've mentioned in the ICE working group, which isn't in our draft yet, which we described as remember to eat breakfast because we thought it was obvious, but apparently it's not, is that not only, you also need some way of, and this is something that Jingle got wrong, by the way, of saying not only who, what generation your candidates are, but which of your generations are matched up to which of the peers' generations. And this can happen, I've had this happen in test cases where like you're spamming, you faked your implementation to think it's ICE restarting once a second. So basically I send an ICE restart, I send a new UFRAG, I send UFRAG A, and then I immediately send UFRAG B, and then you send me back UFRAG C. I don't know whether you're pairing C with A or with B.
Because you're saying I got C, because it's part of the answer appearing.
Yes, because there is no answer, because this is just trickle.
No, wait, it's still the answer. It's still the answer. It's just announce the new UFRAG and password.
Okay, so in JSUP, the UFRAG and password is always associated with, the ICE restart is always a fresh JSUP. You can't just trickle an ICE restart?
There's no indicator for doing that to the best of my knowledge.
All right, in that case, you don't have a problem. I think that, I'm not sure that, I think that, okay.
So I don't think, because I think at the time when you receive the answer, you just have to, well, actually, you may still be, yeah, because you know what variation your things is because they come with their own UFRAGs and passwords.
Right. So, I mean, I guess as long as the ICE restart can only happen in a full JSUP and not in the trickle, I think this is fine.
That's my understanding of the situation.
Okay, in that case, this problem doesn't exist for JSUP, so, and you're fine. But yeah, I agree that you need to associate trickles with generations here.
Peter Thatcher, disagree?
Peter Thatcher. No, I was just going to point out that one thing that's not clear here is that the real pain point for this is the fact that ICE restarts are rollbackable. If that's a word.
Yes.
So
I'll be getting back to that in a second. Actually, that's my next slide.
So I was going to say that, I agree that like we need some way of putting in the UFRAG and the little thing you have there indicating that it can be at the WebRTC level.
Which I think you wrote, so.
Yeah, it's great.
It's pretty awesome, actually. Good, Jason.
Ben Schwartz. So I have a WebRTC application with a nice simple piece of signaling logic that takes every ICE candidate event and checks if it's null, and if it's not null, passes it over verbatim to the other side. So what happens when this object hits a browser from 2015? On the receiver side, if the remote peer is up to date, but the local side is a browser that doesn't have this, that can't parse type end.
I mean, as far as I can tell, what happens is you try to add as candidate, you get an error, and then depending how paranoid you are, your application, your thing may or may not crash.
I mean, you're basically talking about moving from one version to
Into the
another.
mic,
Oh, sorry. You're basically talking about moving from one version to another, and we've had to do this a number of times, so we could do it by deploying new versions of browsers that can receive this, and then wait till they're deployed, and then switch over to the ones that send it. I mean, it's a deployment issue, but it's solvable.
Plus, you were implementing a draft, so you get what you deserve.
Okay, just pointing out that there is in fact a flag day kind of situation to avoid here.
That may well be true with the UFRAG and password on the candidates as well.
Yep, I had to implement some logic that broke my application too.
You're welcome. Okay,
So I got just a question. So which document does this go in?
I mean, it sounds like it has to go into, it sounds like JSAP, but it might be WebRTC. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I guess WebRTC. So we can propose that to the WebRTC people. I don't think we made the change for the other one already, right?
Hey,
For the
Christopher,
candidates, right?
could one of you guys just log a bug right now so we don't lose that?
Right, but on
Just
the
for clarification, WebRTC PC.
Sorry?
On the WebRTC spec.
On the WebRTC
Yeah, I can do
PC
that.
sec. Can you do that one? Thanks.
Does it have to have a type?
Sorry?
Does it have to have a type? Yeah. We need to encode something. Yeah. Okay, sure. They'll sort that out.
Okay.
We need an unambiguous
Yeah.
indication that this is the last candidate, and it needs to be a separate
Right.
thing.
Yes.
I'm sure those guys.
The WCC guys can figure it
Yeah,
out.
maybe that's
look
what
at
they
it,
those guys are crazy.
I mean, they're kind of incompetent, but yeah.
But you're logging the bug, right, Mark? Yep.
Bernard, but I think, Eric, you already put in the bug, in fact.
Huh?
I think you already
I
filed
think I
the
may
issue.
have. I think you're right. Yeah.
You did. And yeah, there's a few things, Bernard above Microsoft. So a few things have to be done to fix it. We have to, because right now I think we say that add ICE candidates can take a null candidate, and it should be this thing instead, and a few little things like that. Yeah.
We'll leave it to the editors. Okay. So we had a bunch of discussion that turned out something that actually appears to be quite simple, and I think actually is quite simple, but we got very confused about it for a while, about rolling back ICE restarts. So I'll give you the meta model first. The conclusion we finally came to was that you never were in a state where you actually were doing ICE checking and then had to roll it back. You can only be in a state where you're doing, where you offered restart and you had to roll back. And so the situation is that you set local with a new UFRAG password, and that puts you into a restart state, at which point the start's done gathering, because that's what you do. But you don't do any checking, and then on the other side you get and then on the other side you get one of two possibilities. Basically, you get on the receiving side. You just set local, you send the offer out. The other side basically does set remote, but that doesn't cause a nice restart. And then they either set local or they don't. But in any case, they're not in a confused state. And then if they send you a rollback, then you're still only in this offering gathering state. And so when you do set remote and it's a rollback, then you just stop gathering and give up. However, contrary-wise, if they do accept the ICE restart, then you follow the procedures from ICE 911 and basically give up on all your checks and all previous checks for the old one, start checking on the new one, but as is cool from 911, you keep sending unverified pairs. So that keeps you in, that keeps you make before break if possible. And I guess it should be clear when you do that local offer, you obviously you don't change ICE states until you're committed. So you shouldn't change ICE states when you just offer the restart and not we conclude it. So I think this is a pretty good answer to this question. As I say, we spent a while trying to figure out we probably spent 2 hours trying to figure out what it meant to roll back when you already were checking, only to realize that was not a coherent state of affairs. So,
Jonathan, it's just somewhat related to the trickling stuff, and maybe you already handled this. But it's certainly possible for somebody to send an offer and then immediately start sending trickles trailing it.
Yeah.
So as the receiver, I might, the JavaScript on the other side might have rejected the offer and might be stupid and feed the trickles in, and the browser shouldn't do anything stupid if fed a trickle for for an ICE context it's not currently checking.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Thatcher, you can even trickle on into candidates, which is exactly why we need a UFRAG.
Right. That's it. So. This is in a draft, but we think it's sensible. So unless someone objects, okay. Next slide. Right. Oh, this is going to be a fun one. So I'd like to call out right now that we are now proposing violating or updating or something or other 3264. So 3264 says some stuff.
No, it's not a violation.
Sorry, we're improving. It's a friendly amendment. So, quote 3264, you must increment the version number by 1 every time you do a new offer, anything changes, and you must otherwise not increment it at all. So that sounds really awesome until you start thinking of trickle ICE, where again, we probably spent 10 hours in this. It goes completely off the rails, and essentially nothing you possibly could say would be sensible. So in particular, if you update it every time you get a new ICE candidate, then you're then the other side sees increments vastly higher than 1, which is incoherent. And if you don't update it, that's bad too. So we finally just gave up, and what we propose is don't stop thinking of these sort of synthetic temporary candidates that are created when you do You know, when you do ICE, when you do ICE, sorry, so when you do ICE candidates, stop thinking of them as like real offers. They're just hanging out there. And so what we propose is basically there's a variable attached to the peer connection that is the last version that was called in set local. And if you do a create offer, something's changed, then you update it. The next create offer has a +1. If it hasn't changed, it doesn't have a +1. And otherwise, you just don't screw with that. And so the important thing to recognize is this will not, this as I say, this doesn't violate 3064 or changes it in the sense that that things where only the candidates have changed may have the same equals value. If what you did was get them out of local candidates instead of calling create offer. That's basically the implication of all this.
And maybe move, so for the record, Trickle Ice for SIP already does exactly this.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I wish we read the draft again. Gonna say this is a bunch of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the logical way to think about this is that the extra candidates you got through Trickle Ice or through this type of thing are an auxiliary thing to the SDP, not a core part of the SDP that increments. So if you think about it that way, this all holds up and is the obvious thing to do.
Okay. Well, to be clear though, if you create offer and they're new candidates, I believe we agreed that that does create an increment, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Next slide. I'm sorry.
This goes against what we agreed at the previous.
Yeah, yeah.
meeting,
Okay,
too,
yeah,
but
that's fine.
much
I mean,
better.
so Jonathan, I mean, I guess just sort of as a related sanity check, we should make sure that whatever SIP trickle and this say are compatible so that people implementing SIP stacks in browsers do not have huge unnecessary headaches.
One of us will try to go read SIP trickle, and maybe Emil could read Rtcweb, and then we can discover that that he's like incrementing by 1 and we're decrementing by 1 or something. Okay. You know, I feel like Justin might want to take this if he's still on the phone.
Actually, Paul Kizavet said he was waiting for a moment to rejoin to ask a question. So, Paul, if you want to leap in the queue now.
I don't know how this works now. Is Paul the E?
Paul,
We're going to add Justin and then delete him. Can we do that?
Now delete him.
Yeah.
And now Paul's up.
Well, that's like you're starting to like the idea of all of our participation, aren't you?
Hi. I've been waiting for a good time. I missed the time when it was up. I had a comment about the very early slide about what codecs to reoffer.
All right.
While you're looking for it, he basically said only offer what was negotiated. This is an old story in SIP offer answer, and it turns out not to be a really good answer. You can get into situations where you can't, where there's things you really want to negotiate that you can't negotiate anymore. And the situation is probably not one that you think about in the Rtcweb case much, but it's where basically one of the endpoints changes its characteristics dramatically. Typically this would happen in SIP with a 3PCC transfer or something like that. So I think this is discussed in RFC 6337. I mean, the basic strategy that works is whenever you're generating a reoffer, you should always offer everything that you are capable of, regardless of whether it was negotiated before or not. Or let's say everything that you're capable of and still interested in using, regardless of whether you think the other guy is currently interested in using it or not. Better to ask him. So in your case, I mean, if you received an offer for alpha and beta previously, and you refused beta because you don't support beta, then sure, the next time when it's your turn to offer, only offer alpha, because you can't do beta. On the other hand, if you previously offered alpha and beta, and only alpha was accepted, then if you need to do another offer, you should still offer alpha and beta, because maybe the other side will be able to do beta and now, and for that matter, maybe it may only be able to do beta, it may not be able to do alpha now. And you might not ever encounter this in a pure Rtcweb topology, but if you've got a SIP device on one end, gatewaying to it, you may indeed run into this.
I see Justin's in the line next. I suspect he wants to talk about this. If not, you can just hang out on the screen, I guess.
Okay, Paul, we're going to let Justin speak, assuming he's on this topic, and then if he's not, we'll kill him again and bring you back up.
All right, can you hear me? Okay, so we discussed this previously and came to the conclusion that we wanted to stick with the negotiated envelope, but there's a couple of reasons for that. And one of the most significant reasons is the fact that it really shouldn't change what parameters of the session you use based on who's offering. And so if the client A offers codecs foo and bar and prefers to do foo, and client B also supports foo and bar but prefers to do bar, if both sides offer all their parameters each time, what you end up with is like you'll be toggling between foo and bar every time you have a reoffer, because each client has its own set of preferences. And trying to make that work really well across like sort of all scenarios is really complicated. If you sort of stick with the the established parameters for the session as from the initial offer, then it removes that whole set of ambiguities. So that's why one of the reasons we chose to stick with this model where you keep the envelope that you've negotiated and you only offer those things.
So I don't know if Paul's going to jump in line, but Martin Thompson, can we not simply instead recommend that people who are using a particular codec should prefer that over any other codec?
So we have to go back and
that avoids the problem.
The point, we have to go back and take this up. We've talked about this probably in several different meetings, and it was not a decision that was taken lightly. There were significant reasons for sticking with this negotiated envelope, and the argument was that you could always do, if you add a new transceiver, that always gets you a fresh envelope, a fresh negotiation. So you're not stuck in this mode where you can never get new parameters. And there's always the sort of concept of the invite with replaces that allows you to choose a set of new parameters. In the Rtcweb context, that's essentially like a new peer connection, or if not a new peer connection, a new transceiver object. That is all.
Tim Terryberg from Mozilla. I think that you must prefer a codec you're using winds up being equivalent to this, right? Because you have to include it in your offer.
Cheers.
Paul, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
So to summarize on this, Justin said, like, look, this method solves some of the other problems, and to interoperate, like if you were doing a video call from a browser to a PBX that was transferring you between a H.264 to a VP9 video phone, everything still works if you do the equivalent of invite with replaces versus the old SIP reoffer mechanism. And that we thought about all these cases and gone down with this, and so that's where we were. So is there anyone that really feels strongly we shouldn't go down this path and wants to speak to it?
Paul in the chat room says, no grumble, but not worth pursuing.
All right then. Hey Justin, you should get back in the queue. I think I'm going to sit down because I think Thatcher and you want to talk about ad track much more than I do.
All right.
Give Thatcher a mic.
Sub-author for this purpose. Okay.
So while reviewing the text here, we're basically trying to make sure that the JSEP had the same methods that were documented as the ones that are in the W3C specification. And so we're wanting to make sure we understand how, from the JSEP standpoint and the STP standpoint, how ad track operates. And so pursuant to my previous comment, we wanted to try to make sure that we could not reuse an M section in cases where we have a new track for the most part, and try to make sure that if you add a track, you got a fresh transceiver, a fresh M section, and you could negotiate a new envelope. This didn't line up exactly with the text that was in the W3 spec, which basically said that a track would be attached to the first compatible transceiver, which never had a direction of send only or send receive. And basically what this means is that in certain cases, ad track will reuse a transceiver, reuse an M section, and possibly reuse a negotiated envelope for an M section. Now, the whole logic that this was designed to cover was the case where you receive an initial offer and it says, I have an M section for audio and M section for video, and you then do ad track for audio, ad track for video, and you don't want two new M sections. You want, as the callee, your tracks to go into the M sections that were offered by the caller. So we have two kind of slightly opposing goals here. One being trying to minimize M section reuse because we don't really feel like we need to optimize that. And two, trying to not create new M sections in the simple one audio or one audio, one video case, especially on the initial offer. So I'm proposing some slightly different text here that basically says we only reuse M sections automatically. Now, the application can always do whatever it wants if it decides to create the M sections manually through a transceiver or manually line up tracks. We only do this automatic reuse in the case where you're in the have remote offer state and new M sections are being offered. And then that solves the case of you receive an initial offer and you want to make sure you as the callee, your tracks go into the same M sections that were offered. But in the future, if there's some receive only M section where someone on the other side has added screen sharing and then you want to add your own track, it doesn't automatically reuse the screen share M section, which might have different parameters, say for a different bandwidth limit or different frame rate or a different set of codecs for the new track that you add. So this is really just a restriction, an additional set of limits on this algorithm of when a track gets reused in an attempt to try to, make M section reuse, only in this one particular case. And Peter and I talked about this a little bit, but I think he may have some comments of his own perspective on this now. I can't hear anything.
Sorry. Can you be a little more specific about why it's bad to reuse the inline in the case you were specifying where the remote side's sending me a screencast, but I'm not sending anything to it. And then I call add track because I want to send something. And then I send, my camera. So on an inline, screen share is coming this way and camera is going that way. I don't completely understand why that's a bad thing.
My concern is that there may have been like FMTP parameters or other things, or perhaps even codecs or ordering of codecs that were negotiated specifically for the M section when it was added in the first place, for adding screen share. And those may very well not be appropriate for, the track that you're trying to add. And grouping that automatically, I think is, we do it in this initial offer case because we want to keep the simple scenario simple. But I think as a rule, generally, a reuse
So-
is probably not what we want.
Okay, so it's basically because since we don't have separate send and receive codecs, you're saying that the codecs might get messed up between the codecs I want to send in one direction and the other might get sort of entangled in a
And
sense.
it's not just codecs. There could be other parameters, bandwidth estimation algorithm or whatever that are on that M section that it might be inadvisable to just assume they're the right ones for whatever new track you're in. You should probably renegotiate them fresh.
So I think I understand the motivation for scoping down the scenarios in which we reuse. So now, if we do scope it down, two things. Number one, I believe we had this rule as one of the options we went through in Yokohama. So I think there is some risk that we're missing some edge case that isn't covered by this, and we'll figure that out in like a month or two. So I do think there's some risk there. However, I don't see one at the moment, except for one, which is the one I want to bring up, which if you're scoping down, I think you need to scope down slightly more, because there's a case where you send an offer, you get back an answer, then you send another offer because you're doing a nice restart. Or sorry, think about the other side. You get an offer, you send back an answer, then you get another offer, and because of a nice restart, now you're in the have remote offer state, and now you call add track. And that point in time, with this rule, you would reuse the inline. So an ICE restart will, in effect, bypass this rule and cause you to reuse an inline. So I think you need to scope it down even more to say that it has the compatible transceiver has to have been created by set remote description by set remote description for the description that put you in the remote offer state and you haven't gone back to the stable state. Sort of. I mean, you have to finagle the text.
Right. That's what I meant.
Does that make sense? It has to be the.
That was my intent. So
that needs to be. Okay. Well, it needs to be more explicit, I guess. So with that, I don't see any immediate problem with scoping it down like this. I would be in favor of it, but I do feel like it's a little bit risky that there's some other edge case we're going to remember in a month.
So Deputy, as chair, I see this as a pretty, not major, but substantial algorithm change. And I wonder if folks here feel like they have their hands around what the change proposal is, or do we need to go through it one more time? In particular, I see Adam at the mic stroking his beard in a puzzled and pensive way.
Yeah, Adam Roach. So just looking at this, it seems kind of baby with the bathwater kind of approach.
A bit, yes.
And I think that a much more simple tweak here would be kind of, put more nuance around what compatible means, right? There's concerns that there are going to be attributes associated with this M section that aren't appropriate for the thing you're adding. So it's just like, okay, fine, detect that, consider it not compatible, and move on. As opposed to having some, I'm kind of concerned that we're going to end up with ballooning of these SDPs in long-running sections, and that's what that's what the reuse rules are supposed to avoid, and it seems this is defeating that purpose to some degree.
I don't think that this actually causes ballooning. You only end up with the number of M sections, a worst case, which is the total number of tracks between the sender and receiver. There is reuse of M sections that are, I guess, in the rejected state or the no longer used state. So we don't end up with like the ballooning of SDP thing was something I was worried about, and that's definitely not something that it will happen or be caused to happen by this change. This is, from my perspective, this is trying to really codify what I thought we had agreed on at previous IETFs, where we said that no, since the formats, the envelope may not be suitable, we weren't going to try to aggressively reuse M sections. And I just felt the text that was in the W3C spec and by sort of the transitive property, the JSIP spec, didn't properly reflect that. So this is really, I don't consider this to be a significant change. This is really just a clarification.
So Justin, can I ask you to address Adam's other suggestion, which is what would happen here? What you simply did was say, if the parameters are not appropriate, you don't see them as compatible.
So, I mean, that's an interesting point. I think the problem is, how does one actually from a normative standpoint, define compatible in that case. And right now, like we have compatible, as you see in the first quote, compatible has a very, very simple definition of, is it of the same media type? And that those sort of rules are the rules I would prefer to write, of ones that are very unambiguous, whereas determining whether like the FMTP parameters that were offered by the remote side in the M section that you might want to reuse are compatible, I'm not exactly sure how I would write that.
So even though earlier I said that there's some risk we'll miss some edge case, I did want to point out that this is really just about the simple default behavior that comes with add track. If there are any more complex scenarios, the application can always use add transceiver. So I don't know if we have to get too worried about what exactly the behavior of add track is, because as long as it covers the basic scenario, if there's some more advanced scenario that it doesn't cover, well, the application can just use add transceiver.
So we had Paul in the queue, but he disappeared again. So we're going to drain the local queue. Paul, if you want to get back in, we see you in the queue. Just let us know. Okay.
Miguel Paris of Curento. From my point of view, while I was implementing this API, the main problem of this method is that it's not determinist. So sometimes it behaves like replace track, and in another cases it behaves like added transceiver. So this difficult too much the development of apps to developers. So I was thinking about remove this method from the API and only allow add transceiver and replace track.
So I definitely am very supportive of like more determinism, and I think that making the rules much more strict here leads to increased determinism.
Ben Schwartz, could you just say that the contents of the M line have to be identical to the contents of an M line that would be generated if you generated a fresh M line for this track?
Identical means that will happen almost never, right? It's very deterministic. I agree. It gives you, if the string exact match, then go on. Otherwise, give yourself a new track. And that is deterministic.
We're talking about fixed endpoints. If the application isn't customizing the behavior and is just calling add track, repeated calls to add track on one side from the same browser should continually generate identical M lines that should overlay.
Justin, we're pressing the button on you again, but Martin is up first.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, that doesn't work because you're actually matching to an M line that was generated by someone else. So you've got no reference. I think I found Peter's argument here really quite compelling, which is if you want to do something special, then we have add transceiver and go for your life. Otherwise, this is the behavior, and this is rather predictable. If people find that this is doesn't suit their needs, do I have the API for you?
I find that compelling as well.
Justin, if you can still hear us, if you could relog in as a speaker, that will enable us to have more than one.
Sorry. Adam Roach, I find Peter's argument there compelling as well. So I'm fine with this. I would severely break out in hives if we decided to take this API away completely just for backwards compatibility reasons. It would freak out everything.
Okay, so one of the things that I think I heard there was that you expressed something that Justin intended but did not capture in the text in front of the working group. As a result, what I'd like is to have you and Justin generate fresh text and send it to the mailing list for review. I think. Okay. I got Peter's thumbs up. Really, do I need Justin's as well? All right, we'll wait for Justin to come back to also agree to work with Peter to send text. But I do think this is a pretty substantial change, and it's one of a class of changes that come with the availability of ad transceiver that we kind of have to consider as we go through this. But we are pretty late in the process. As you heard us say earlier today, we've had drafts in the RFC editor's queue for 560 days. That's a substantial amount of time. And we would really like to be done. So clearly, as implementations proceeds, we can continue to find some things, but breaking changes should be as limited as possible. Thank you. Is Justin back yet? I don't see him. Okay, given that we're running close on time, we'll reconfirm with Justin at the end of the thing, and in the meantime, we'll move over to the SDP examples draft. Krista? Sure, Krista, jump up.
Just keep in mind, I think there are a few, we need references. First of all, I think the reference to MOOCs exclusive need to be added to JSEP if it's not already there. The reference to draft DTLS SDP needs to be added there because that describes the offer answer now procedures for DTLS. And in addition, I think I raised this issue earlier in Buenos Aires or somewhere. I believe we currently reference RFC 5245, but I assume we're going to reference also ICE-BIS also in JSEP. I hope we are because, yeah.
So I didn't hear Martin's comment, but I did hear he made it.
I mean, the easy way, hopefully it's only just, creating a pull request that adds this reference to the draft. But I was just wondering, maybe there's some procedures also needed where we see that, for example, MOOCs exclusive. Is there going to be an option to whether you use it or not, or is it just an implementation issue?
So why don't we start with the pull request and see where we go? All right. So Justin, according to our scribe, you're back. The resolution of the previous matter was you and Peter working together to incorporate text that captured the point that Peter made, which seemed to have a good bit of support in the room, and sending it for review to the working group mailing list. Just now you have that. And now we'll go on to the SDP examples draft, for which I must start by thanking Paul Kizavat for a very large review, still ongoing, but quite extensive already. And thank him for taking care of that for the SDP directorate.
So the bulk of this work is Suhas's work. I'm presenting this because Suhas couldn't get a visa to be here, but let's step through this. So this draft has a bunch of examples to try and, illustrate most of the issues. And we might need a few more things, but I encourage people to take a look at it and see if it has the information they largely think they want on it. We had Paul found a bunch of mistakes through it, as well as just consistency items. A lot of these were edited by hand over different periods of time, so we got a lot of that straightened out, fixed a ton of errors on that. There are a few open issues. And most of these may actually closely link with the comment Krister just had a minute ago about which draft are we referencing out of JSEP. And I think the answer on most of these is we need to be on ICE-BIS and Trickle ICE and those things, latest version of bundle. So this one right here, we have a contradiction between ICE-SIP, bundle, and JSEP, and we just need to align all of these drafts, and then we'll get the examples to align as well. Krista, you got to take on which one's the right one here? I mean,
You write all those?
sorry?
I said, did you write this? And then you can write all of them? Anyway, like guys,
Well, then you have a clear preference.
Yeah. Two.
Two? It's not I mean, other people have like, look, all of these things I'm going to put up here are like, pick one event. It doesn't really matter what you pick, but it matters that we pick one, right? So.
I don't care, but I think the question of whether the SDP or TCP answer clearly needs to be decided in music or ICE, not here. So we should simply conform to whatever they decide.
Music got canceled.
So I guess ICE wins.
It got moved to Friday,
Move Friday, okay.
so we can add the question to their.
Kirsten, I believe the reason for number 2 is that we made a decision some time ago that if you end up using bundle, you're also going to use RTP, RTCP mux. So that's the reason why you're not going to include that attribute. But I mean, but then you of course have, you know, in the cases where you don't use bundle, then if you need to say something, but then obviously number 2 is not relevant.
So this draft is totally about Rtcweb examples that would.
Sure,
I guess
you can use RTCP.
right, without bundle.
I actually am kind of serious that the purpose of JSEP is to profile / reinforce decisions made in other documents. So, I mean, maybe we think we have enough to coordinate this decision, but if there's actually a substantive decision to be made, it should be made in the music, unless we're pretending to be on music for the purpose of this discussion.
So we're not pretending to be music, but clearly if you have opinions about this issue, and now that it's been raised to you as participants in Rtcweb, participating in the discussion when it occurs is favorite. And we will reach out to the music chairs to see if there's time on their agenda on Friday.
This one's in the same scope of things. I mean, JSEP is at least in this working group.
So I guess, well, I'll be happy to negotiate in music again, but for what it's worth, I think we decided this wrongly, and I think we should go with number 2. You know, I'm starting to get a little worried about how many things we're duplicating between M lines.
So Martin Thompson, I think number 2 is correct. And I believe that I've seen the code for this recently, and Firefox implements number 2. So
can you just log a plug against JSEP to fix that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So actually, to go back to Ecker's point, can we go back to the first slide?
That one.
If the case is that we expect bundle and ICE/SIP SDP to cover this issue, does that mean we should take out line 1 from JSEP?
Well, I think it means we should fix JSEP to correctly match what bundle and ICE say.
But does it fix it or just reference it? And
It should only reference it.
Okay, so does it even need to repeat what's said there, or please see X for it, thus allowing us to take it off the table for this working group entirely?
So Justin may have a separate opinion about this, but I think we've attempted with JSEP to restate the essential facts of how one is supposed to implement this. And so that there's some discretion whether there's an essential fact or not, but there are many things in JSON that are essentially simply reinforcement and duplication of things, and then followed by references to other documents. So, you know, I guess my claim would be it's editor discretion about whether this goes in or not. But we're happy. I think I'm the editor happy to conform to the decisions made by music and make it consistent.
So I'm not sure.
If you think that we should not be attempting to restate.
No. What I'm looking at this and saying, I'm not sure 2 and 3 are in disagreement if JSEP is silent, right? Because it's the one that's saying that it must be in bundled M lines, where bundle says not with bundled M lines in the answer, and SIP,
yes,
SDP.
I mean, these two are. Yeah, those two are consistent.
Right.
Yeah,
We're
I
just
think-
inconsistent with Jason.
So I think if Ecker's point is that our aim here is to restate what has been stated in the other drafts, then we do that by making 1 consistent with 2 and 3, since they are actually consistent. Okay,
Yeah.
tell me that they're not.
Jonathan, I mean, as I'm reading 2 and 3, what it's saying is that, I mean, it seems to be saying that, if you bundle to something where RTP and RTCP are not +1, bundle says don't include the ARTCP for other than the bundle for other than the first M line, and ICE SIP SDP says do include it.
No, it says in the second one, if it's not +1.
Right, yeah, it's
So
not plus.
this is not bundled, right, by definition?
Oh, okay, that's not plus. Why is that not bundled by definition? Oh, no,
I'm sorry, it's not RTP mux.
not RTP mux, yes. Not bundled, I mean, you can be bundled without being RTP mux.
Yeah, I think so, we did.
Did we? I mean, I know that Rtcweb decided you can't do that. Did bundle decide you can't do that? Okay, well, in that case, never mind, I guess, but.
Krister, what did we say?
Krista, I think I was going to say was just say that number 2 only covers the bundle case. When you're not using bundle, then obviously number 3 applies. But this is just one sentence on number 3, so I don't know if that talks about non-bundle or bundle. But
Okay, so let's take Justin.
so
and then-
I guess what JSEP would say, for example, if you use bundle, you do according to. If you in JSEP you would say if you do bundle, you do according to number 2, and if not, you do according to. I don't know if it's number 3 or something else, but
according to ICE SIP SDP.
the only thing I wanted to say that number 2 only covers bundle M lines, not non-bundle M.
Okay, Justin?
So I want to speak just to the overall point that Ecker raised of, should we be being prescriptive in JSEP or not? And as Eric mentioned, I think there's a definite, editorial expectation that we are going to try to be prescriptive, and specifically to try to avoid this ambiguity here of saying that, there's literally dozens of documents. We've done the hard work of looking through them, and here's how your SDP should actually look. So I do think that, trying to, of course, make them consistent with the other specs, this type of review is really useful. But I do think that, we should take whatever we come out of here and then push this into the JSEP to actually make it very clear exactly what the implementer should do. On this particular slide, I do think that it's not clear to me why bundle says there should not be an RTCP tag in there, given that RTCP mux and the ICE specs say you should include RTCP attributes, even if you are doing RTCP mux.
Well then, Martin Thompson, well then that suggests that we have a problem to solve in MMusic. I was going to get up to say that I'm about to open an issue on JSEP. Maybe it's just a tracking issue at this point. But my take was that if we wanted to follow the current bundle specification, we've got a bug in JSEP. It may be that we don't have one. I'll make that note as well.
Well, so if the bundle spec changes to match what JSEP currently says, then obviously we don't change JSEP. But I think at the moment, if what the bundle and ICE SDP say remain, then we do change JSEP simply to remove this.
So my proposal is we open a tracking bug, if nothing else, on JSON. 296. Sorry? That's the number? Okay, 296. Awesome. And then we somebody sends over to the music working group that we think this stinks or something.
So I'm going to suggest you send this entire deck over to the MMusic working group and ask that we present it during their Friday thing.
Alyssa Cooper, their whole agenda is coordination with Rtcweb. They have 45 minutes of how are we going to get stuff done for the Rtcweb relevant drafts.
So let's send this over to them as well. We can talk about it here. We can talk about it there. Just
See y'all there Friday.
double bundled M lines. Yes, it's in M music.
So I suspect that this one, we probably want to say something in JSUP as well, just from the tracking point of view.
Kirsty, I mean, the whole reason for this new attribute, the MOOCs exclusive, was basically Rtcweb, the browser vendor saying that, you know, at some point we are only going to we're not going to support non-RTP RTCP MOOCs. So that's the whole reason why we started this work. So I assume that's going to be covered. Number 2 again says only talks about bundle only M-lines, but you can use this MOOCs only even with non-bundled. And I think but I think this is covered actually in draft Rtcweb RTP usage. So maybe you need to look at that one also. I think that one says, well, it says that you must support this draft MOOCs only, but I don't think it goes into the details how you create your offer and answer. So maybe you need to.
So I think the general style of JSUP would be that we would at least mention how to deal with this with pointers to the right places. So like, Martin, can you give me another bug for this one? Okay. Didn't we just do this one?
Yeah.
Am I going backwards? Losing my mind. Okay.
That's why slide numbers are helpful.
You know, it's really embarrassing, but I only learned today that like Google had this little, you could go insert and it put numbers on all your slides. It was...
That's because it didn't have it for a very long time.
Oh. Thank you, Peter, for teaching me Google. So, you know, this is I mean, JSUP is JSUP STP usage for sure, not generic. But on the IceBiz reference here, I don't see any way we cannot be moving to IceBiz, Trickle Ice, and StunBiz, right? Is that where people are thinking we're going with this stuff?
Yes, I assume that's you picked first editor.
How long will it take your auth 48 on this one? Okay, so I think like the comment on this one is I think we plan again on, well, we already have the one on JSON. This draft is really miserable to review. If anyone's willing to review it, other than like really thankful for Paul reviewing it, but if somebody else is willing to review it, it'd be great. Just.
I had one more comment that I sent on the list, which was not covered here. I gave this comment on JSUP, but it obviously it also affects this draft. Is the draft DTLS STP? We have this new DTLS ID attribute and all that stuff. So that needs to be added there. And also maybe you had on number 1 on the previous slide. You had this JSUP STP versus generic STP. One of the comments I think I had on this document, in JSUP we have this so-called pre-provisional answer, and I think it would be good to say that you don't have the same thing in generic STP. So I think it would be good to have some text about saying this is something that you can't really map, or something. Describe how you do it. If you get from JSUP a provisional answer, and you know, you send it somewhere, and then you get the final answer, which is different than the provisional answer. JSUP allows that, but 3264 of our answer does not allow that. So you cannot just.
I don't think I agree with you on that.
No, we have talked about this before, yeah, well, you can do it in a different branch, but this draft doesn't talk about branch or zip at all. But my point is that you need to describe that, and you cannot just not forward it. You need to have a mechanism to have different dialogues or whatever, but because 3264 does not allow, within a single offer and answer transaction, does not allow to update the answer from a previously sent answer.
So what would you like to see in this draft? In the tech, do we have an example of a provisional offer answer in this draft? I forget if we did or
No,
not.
you don't. It doesn't cover it at all, and that was my point.
And you think we should add one of those
I
and
think
make
we
it
need
clear?
to need to cover it because
Okay.
implementers need to be aware. We cannot just take these answers and send them out on the wire if we use 3264 on the wire because it's not allowed.
Well, it is allowed with the correct signaling.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to somehow.
Right. Well, we need to say all of that. Okay, so we need to capture that in the minutes somehow. Who's doing minutes?
Jonathan, I mean, is this actually the right draft for talking about gatewaying between JSTEP and?
No, but we should just show an example of that. No. Definitely, we're not describing how to write a SIP WebRTC gateway here. No way.
Yeah. I also had a comment on your next slide about the review. I know you mentioned offline the possibility of like automatically extracting the SDP from this draft and like so that people could potentially like feed it to their parsers or implementations and see what happens.
Yeah. So Harold had a request. I think it was Harold, but somebody said like, look, allow me to easily take this SDP out and stuff it into a into test cases or whatever. Suhas and I will figure out how to restructure this somehow such that it's already in a GitHub repo, but such that the examples are standalone files and we can generate raw SDP and an ASCII text file from them as well as the things, and that people can go and use those for whatever they want to do.
So what is the state of play with these? Have these been machine generated?
No.
Did they machine parse?
That's what we're talking about.
Okay, but okay, what do we know now? They
They
machine
have
parse.
not been machine parsed in a while.
Yeah.
But they were machine. I'm willing to bet that when we machine parse them, we'll find a syntax error. Right.
Right. I guess I'm just sort of wondering if really it's a mistake to have hand generated things. It's going to be very, very hard to put us in a state where we can validate these are correct. Even machine parsing them is nowhere near enough to validate they're correct, right?
Yeah, it's true, but we have a pretty big test framework at Cisco we can dump them into to somewhat validate. But it's hard, but it's the machine generating them doesn't actually really help the problem much either, right? Like writing just a program that generates them, you just encode all the mistakes in your program.
Well, I guess.
What are you thinking?
I mean, I guess I'm thinking producing them with implementation.
Yeah, but neither of the implementations support like half the stuff that's in here. So,
well, I'm not sure what that reveals something about something. I think.
Yeah, it does.
Well, but remember the reason we have a separate document for this is it's for cases where we expected it to be reaching out from the RTC web world to a different world. And so the fact that the RTC web implementations don't have this is not particularly surprising either at this point or in general.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, like, if people can somehow generate us real examples like that came from a browser-to-browser live call, we intercept it and use it, that's awesome. But I mean, it's a big chunk of work. I know Suhas and I aren't going to do it. If we can get them, that's wonderful. But we certainly can take all of these and dump them into a browser and see what happens.
The offers are much easier, obviously.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, I suspect that we have a number of use cases that deal with the basic things. Simple call setup, renegotiation, all those sorts of other things that we have in our test cases, and we could just scrape the SDP that goes into the log. We did log the damn things. And so, certainly not that much work to actually get an implementation to just spew out a number of these, but we do, I don't know, however many calls on a regular test run, and these things, millions of them have been generated over the past couple of years.
So can I ask you to share what you get from your initial scrape with Suhas and see how easy it is to move them in to replace the ones that were hand generated?
Yeah.
It won't be all of them though. That's the.
Yeah, we won't be able to cover all the corner cases, and
we
don't have support for LS groups and a whole bunch of all these other things, but we could get a lot further than just hand.
The thing is,
stuff.
I mean, I'm fine to do that, but like, remember, you got to write. You have to process those with some code, right? After you generate them, you have to move all the IP addresses to ones IETF approves and all of that crap. And so I suspect we'll get the easy stuff, but I suspect that where the mistakes are in this draft are not
somewhere
those
else.
ones.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, last time I looked at one of these,
So I don't know, I guess maybe I'm just projecting, but the last time I spent time looking at SDP examples of someone hand generated, they were full of mistakes. Now maybe that's better because Paul read through it. But like, I mean, full of like clearly erroneous shit, right? So I don't know.
Well, so
If somebody sends us replacement examples, glad to put them in. It'd be wonderful to have machine generated ones. I just like, it's a fair amount of work is all I'm saying.
Yep. And speaking with my chair hat on, and if Sean wants to get in the box, he can put his on too. The review applies to all of our documents at this stage, in particular to JSEP, which is undergoing the most active change and discussion. We really want to get ourselves to a working group last call, if possible before Seoul. So we would like the review of this too, but frankly, JSIP is the longest pole in our tent. So please set aside some time for it. We'll see if we can organize some things to get a pace of review going, but anticipate being pressed on this point.
Okay, Justin Roberto says, happy to discuss writing some JavaScript to machine generate these.
Okay. Okay, great. Tim?
Yeah, Tim Panton. One thing you might look at for that is what the ORTC group are doing, because they produced a load of stuff that's supposed to go from that format to SDP and back again in JavaScript. So I don't know if any of that's applicable, but it might be worth asking.
At least 5 or 6 of these should do.
So did Bernard leave? Apparently, okay.
That's it.
Okay, so that was the last of our agenda items for today, other than reminding you of MMusic's replacement session on Friday, which will be about WebRTC. Are there any other points of business for RTC Web today?
Alyssa Cooper. So we had some discussion about like setting up some means of organizing the reviews in the fall. Most of the documents not coming from this group, but some of them are, because there's going to be lots of documents finishing up. Is there any sort of plan of action on that, or is it TBD?
TBD. And so let's just start off with the idea we were discussing a while back, was just take all the sort of normative dependencies we have that aren't finished yet, and try and just schedule a week or a 2-week period, whatever. We're at a time where we were going to have everyone review, look at, and try and finish off each one of those. When we looked at the actual list of what was remaining, it was somewhat shorter than people thought. So it may not be that that's as critical. But I think on some of these, we do need to schedule some reviews.
So I think that the aim would be that during September, we would go through a series of review periods, which might coincide with virtual interim, or design team meetings, whatever the heck we want to call them, of people getting together and reviewing. And that cadence would be what would push us into the ability to go to a working group last call before Seoul. Ben?
Ben Schwartz. I just wanted to say I'm not going to be at the session tomorrow. I'm going to be on a plane. So there's plenty of people around who know plenty about return if people want to talk about it at the session tomorrow. But if anyone who wants to talk about it with me, come find me today.
Andrew Allen, yes, with regard to this issue about prioritizing reviews of the draft, is it worth looking at which drafts are related to other drafts, so that we don't get into a situation where we're waiting for this last one to come in, that then is the trigger for the publication requests for all the drafts, because then that will overload the RFC editor, and it'll be a long while before we get most of the drafts published because of that kind of bottleneck.
So we have good news and bad news. The good news is, yes, we have looked at this. The bad news is, especially because of the way we did the overview draft, it does turn out that one of those logjam situations looks to be pretty likely.
Does it depend on all of them? Okay. So
So nothing happens, so nothing can be published until we complete it all, pretty much. Is that the case?
It's not quite that bad, but it's
560 days is nothing.
Because then our 48-hour reviews are going to turn into 48 weeks, you know.
I mean, this is okay, this was run like a couple, maybe a month or something before the current meeting, right? And so some of this information is a little bit off, that things have moved forward since then. But there's this Jennings Rtcweb dependencies draft that has all of the dependencies of everything, so you can see each draft, how it depends. And, you know, this is the rough summary of stuff that we still have that's outstanding. But I think when you come around to it, you come to IceBiz and JSIP and Trickle Ice. You know, those ones are the long poles in the tent for probably most metrics. So go and beat the authors of those.
Well, I think we held on to JSEP, so we can beat the JSEP authors, at least the ones that bothered to fly all the way to Berlin to be beaten. Okay, thanks everybody for coming today. Please do come to the M-Music session if those issues are of interest to you.